A frail, wheelchair-bound veteran sits at the center of a packed courtroom, his medals glinting under the harsh lights. Laughter erupts as Judge Harrington mocks him, but William Thompson remains unshaken. With quiet defiance, he leans forward and delivers a single warning. "Buckle up, Your Honor, because you're about to regret underestimating me." What started as a ruthless eviction lawsuit spirals into a high-stakes legal war against corruption. Armed only with determination, William exposes the lies, dismantles the system built to crush him, and turns the courtroom into his battlefield, one where the underdog refuses to lose. Where are you watching from? Write it down in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because this story is just getting started. The courtroom buzzed with tension, a low hum of whispers and smirks rippling through the air. The camera pans slowly over polished shoes, expensive suits, and faces that reek confidence. In the center of it all sits an elderly man in a wheelchair. His military uniform is worn but pressed, his medals glinting faintly under the harsh fluorescent lights. He's small, frail even, yet there's something unshakable about him, a quiet defiance that seems to fill the room despite his stillness. This is where legends are made, or broken. William Thompson, a disabled veteran who once carried a rifle for his country, now finds himself armed only with determination as he faces off against one of the most powerful legal teams money can buy. Judge Raymond Harrington leans back in his chair, his gavel resting lazily in hand. His cold gray eyes scan the defendant like a predator sizing up prey. A smirk tugs at the corner of his mouth. "Let me get this straight." The judge scoffs, tilting his head mockingly. "You, a disabled veteran, think you can represent yourself in court against one of the top legal teams in the country?" The courtroom erupts into laughter. Spectators exchange knowing looks, shaking their heads at what they see as sheer absurdity. Even the lawyers on the other side can't help but chuckle, leaning into each other as if sharing some private joke. And then Judge Harrington delivers the knockout punch. Or so he thinks. Leaning further back, his voice dripping with sarcasm, he says, "Let's see what kind of legal genius a man who spent his life holding a rifle instead of a law book has to offer." More laughter fills the room, echoing off the wooden panels and high ceilings. But amidst the noise, William doesn't flinch. His weathered hands remain steady on the arms of his wheelchair, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the entire courtroom seems to hold its breath, waiting. Finally, William moves. Slowly, deliberately, he wheels himself forward just enough to command attention. Then, in a voice both calm and commanding, he speaks, and when he does, the laughter dies instantly. "Your Honor," he says, meeting the judge's gaze without hesitation, "with all due respect, I suggest you buckle up. Because by the time I'm done here, you'll see exactly why underestimating me was the biggest mistake of your life." A heavy silence falls over the courtroom. Smirks fade, lawyers shift uncomfortably in their seats, and somewhere deep down, everyone knows this isn't going to be the easy win they expected. The story doesn't begin in the courtroom. It begins 2 months earlier, on a quiet porch where the sun dips low, casting long shadows across weathered wooden planks. William Thompson sits alone, his wheelchair creaking slightly as he shifts. The sunset paints the sky in fiery hues, orange, red, and gold. But it's clear his mind isn't on the beauty before him. His eyes are distant, reflecting years of battles fought not just on foreign soil, but within himself. He lost the use of his legs in combat, a sacrifice etched into every movement he makes. But what truly weighs heavy tonight is something else entirely. In his hands, he holds a letter. Not a medal or commendation this time, but a cold, impersonal document accusing him of violating some obscure property law. A powerful real estate company wants his home. They claim he's broken rules he never knew existed, and now they're coming for everything he has left. William reads it again, his jaw tightening with each word. This house wasn't just 4 walls and a roof. It was where his wife spent her final days, where he rebuilt his life after returning from war. And now, men in suits wanted to rip it away from him. Close up on his clenched fist, gripping the edge of the wheelchair. "Not on my watch," he mutters under his breath, his voice firm despite the storm brewing inside him. What follows is a montage of determination meeting despair. William wheels himself into one law office after another, hoping someone will stand with him, but door after door slams shut. Lawyers glance at the lawsuit papers, their expressions shifting from curiosity to pity to outright dismissal. "I'm sorry, sir," one says, shaking his head. "This case is too big for us. They have the best attorneys in the country." Another offers hollow condolences. You'd need a miracle to win against them. By the end of the day, William finds himself sitting alone on a park bench, staring at the lawsuit papers in his lap. His wheelchair feels heavier than ever, the weight of the world pressing down on him. But then something changes. Something hardens in his gaze. If no lawyer would fight for him, he would fight for himself. And so, the old soldier begins preparing for a new kind of battle, one that will take place not on a battlefield, but in a courtroom. William's small living room had transformed into something unrecognizable. What was once a quiet space filled with faded furniture and old photographs now resembled a war room. Every surface, tables, chairs, even the floor, was covered in stacks of law books, court case files, and scribbled notes. A whiteboard leaned against the wall, covered in arrows, legal terms, and highlighted deadlines. It wasn't just clutter, it was evidence of a man refusing to back down. The camera pans over the chaos as William sits at the center of it all, his wheelchair pulled up to a makeshift desk. His glasses rest low on his nose, and his fingers trace lines in an open book about zoning laws. The dim light of a desk lamp casts shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched into his features. He rubs his eyes, blinking hard to focus. For a moment, doubt flickers in his expression. This is impossible, he thinks. But then he shakes his head, straightens his shoulders, and flips to the next page. Late one night, Sarah, his neighbor, knocks softly on the door before letting herself in. She's carrying a thermos of coffee and a plate of sandwiches. Her kind-hearted smile softens when she sees him surrounded by papers, his hands trembling slightly from fatigue. "Mr. Thompson," she says gently, setting the food down. "You need to rest." William doesn't look up immediately. When he does, there's fire in his tired blue eyes. "If I stop now, I lose everything," he says firmly, his voice rough but resolute. Sarah hesitates, then pulls up a chair beside him. She glances at the mess of documents scattered around them. "What are you working on?" He pushes a thick binder toward her. "Zoning ordinances. They're claiming I violated some obscure rule that didn't even exist when I bought this house. If I can prove they're lying." His voice trails off, but the determination in his tone says it all. Sarah flips through the pages, her brow furrowing. "This stuff is complicated." She looks at him skeptically. "How are you figuring this out?" William chuckles dryly. "One word at a time." For a moment, they sit in silence, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on them both. Then Sarah squares her shoulders. "Okay," she says, surprising even herself. "Teach me. Break it down for me, and I'll help." At first, William protests. "You don't have to do this." But Sarah insists. "Yes, I do. Because if they win, it's not just your home they take, it's hope. And I'm not letting that happen." Over the next few weeks, their unlikely partnership becomes the backbone of William's fight. Sarah reads aloud from dense legal texts while William takes notes, occasionally stopping her to clarify or explain. Together, they break down complex jargon into simpler terms, turning mountains of information into actionable strategies. There are moments of frustration. William slamming a book shut after hours of dead ends, Sarah groaning as she tries to decipher yet another confusing statute. But there are also breakthroughs. One evening, after finally piecing together a key argument, William leans back in his wheelchair, a rare smile breaking through his usual stoic demeanor. "We've got them," he says quietly, almost to himself. Sarah grins, triumphant. "Yeah, we do." As the days pass, William grows sharper, more confident. He isn't just learning the law, he's mastering it. And Sarah, watching him transform from a weary veteran into a formidable opponent, feels a renewed sense of admiration. This isn't just about saving a house anymore. It's about proving that no matter how powerful the enemy, courage and determination can level the playing field. By the time the trial date approaches, William has turned his living room into a fortress of knowledge. The stacks of books and papers remain, but now they represent something different, not confusion, but clarity, not fear, but readiness. As he wheels himself away from the table one final time, Sarah stops him with a hand on his shoulder. "You've got this," she says, her voice steady despite the nerves they both feel. William nods, meeting her gaze. "We've got this." And for the first time, he truly believes it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as William Thompson rolled himself up to the entrance, his military uniform pressed and medals gleaming despite their age. Heads turned as he passed through the heavy wooden doors, some whispered behind cupped hands, others stared openly. A disabled veteran representing himself against one of the most powerful legal teams in the city? It was almost laughable. Or so they thought. Inside, Richard Sullivan stood at the plaintiff's table, his designer suit perfectly tailored, his confidence radiating like a beacon. He smirked as William wheeled into view, dismissing him with a glance before turning back to his team, chuckling under his breath. This was going to be easy. But then Judge Harrington entered, slamming his gavel down with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. "Let's begin," he said curtly, leaning forward with an expression that suggested he already knew how this would end. Sullivan rose smoothly, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your Honor, we believe this case is clear-cut. Mr. Thompson is in violation of zoning laws, and we demand immediate action to remove him from the property." His words hung in the air, polished and practiced, meant to intimidate. William didn't flinch. He sat still, his hands resting lightly on the arms of his wheelchair, his blue eyes sharp and focused. When it was his turn to speak, he adjusted himself slightly, clearing his throat. The courtroom fell silent, waiting. "Your Honor," William began, his voice steady and commanding, "before we proceed, I'd like to ask the plaintiff's counsel a few questions." Judge Harrington raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed. "This is highly unusual." "Objection," Sullivan interjected, not even bothering to hide his smirk. "It's a simple question," William countered calmly. "If they're so confident in their case, it shouldn't be a problem, right?" Harrington sighed, waving a hand dismissively. "Proceed, but keep it brief." William turned to Sullivan, his gaze unwavering. "Mr. Sullivan, under which statute is your client claiming I'm in violation?" Sullivan blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. He hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "Well, under multiple property codes and municipal regulations." "Which one specifically?" William pressed, cutting him off. "I assume a lawyer of your caliber wouldn't bring a case without a firm legal basis. Can you cite the exact code?" Silence filled the courtroom. All eyes were on Sullivan now, who shifted uncomfortably, flipping through a thick binder in front of him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the seconds ticked by. Finally, Sullivan cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "We'll provide that information later." William let out a small, knowing smile. "Oh, I think we do." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Sullivan's face flushed red as whispers turned into outright murmurs of disbelief. Judge Harrington leaned forward, tapping his fingers impatiently against the bench. "Mr. Sullivan, I expect you to have your legal citations ready by the next session." Sullivan muttered something under his breath, visibly irritated, but William wasn't done yet. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into the folder on his lap and pulled out a stack of documents. Holding them up, he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to present these." He handed the papers to the clerk, who brought them to the judge. "This," William explained, "is a record of my property deed, signed, stamped, and legally approved 25 years ago." Another document followed. "And this is proof of every property tax payment I've made since then, all paid in full, on time, no violations." Harrington skimmed the documents, his frown deepening. William continued, his voice carrying weight now. "Finally, Your Honor, this is a copy of the original zoning law they claim I violated. Except there's a problem." He paused dramatically, letting the tension build. "The law they're using to evict me was passed 3 years after I bought my house." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Sullivan's jaw clenched, his earlier smugness crumbling. Judge Harrington flipped through the document, his expression unreadable, but undeniably troubled. William leaned forward, delivering the final blow. "Which means, Your Honor, not only is their case built on nothing, but even if I had violated their so-called law, it wouldn't apply to me, because the law doesn't work backward." For the first time that day, Judge Harrington looked shaken. Sullivan sank into his chair, pale and sweating. The energy in the courtroom shifted entirely. What had started as mockery was now awe. William sat back in his wheelchair, satisfied. In just minutes, he had dismantled their entire argument, exposing the truth. They had underestimated him, and it was about to cost them everything. The battle wasn't just happening inside the courtroom anymore. Outside, tensions were rising, and so were the stakes. It started late one night. William wheeled himself toward his garage door, Sarah close behind him, when he saw it. In bold red spray-painted letters across the metal, "Get out, or else." The words glared back at him under the dim porch light. A chilling threat that sent shivers through anyone who read them. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "William, this is serious. These people mean business." But William didn't flinch. His jaw tightened as he stared at the graffiti, his eyes narrowing with quiet determination. "They're trying to scare me," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "It won't work." And then came the next blow, a breaking news alert flashing across every screen in town. Headlines screamed accusations. Disabled veteran accused of forging property deed. News outlets ran wild with reports claiming discrepancies in William's documents, suggesting fraud without any concrete evidence. Reporters camped outside his home, neighbors whispered behind closed doors, and public opinion began to shift against him. "They're destroying your reputation," Sarah said urgently, showing him an article on her phone. Her voice trembled with frustration. "How are we supposed to fight something like this?" William exhaled slowly, gripping the arms of his wheelchair. "We don't have to fight their lies," he said firmly. "We stick to the truth. That's all we need." But the attacks weren't limited to media smear campaigns. The next morning, as William rolled out of the courthouse after another grueling session, Richard Sullivan was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. Gone was the smug confidence from before. Now there was only anger, raw and unfiltered. "You think you're smart, old man?" Sullivan spat, stepping closer. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, the cracks in his polished facade finally showing. "You've embarrassed one of the biggest real estate firms in the country. Do you really think they're going to let that slide?" Sarah stepped forward protectively, glaring at Sullivan. "Back off! This case has already fallen apart and you know it." Sullivan ignored her, his focus locked on William. He leaned in, his voice dripping with venom. "Let me make one thing clear. The law doesn't matter when you have power. When you have money. We own judges. We own officials. Your little war hero act isn't going to change anything." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then William spoke, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Let me tell you something, son," he said, wheeling himself forward until he was inches away from Sullivan. "I've seen men like you before. Bullies who think their money makes them invincible. And do you know what happens to them?" Sullivan swallowed hard, but said nothing. "They fall," William continued, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Sullivan's. "Because they underestimate the wrong person." A muscle in Sullivan's jaw twitched. He forced a smirk, though it wavered. "We'll see about that," he muttered, before turning on his heel and walking away, disappearing into the sea of reporters gathered nearby. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "William, that man is dangerous." "I know," William replied simply, his gaze still fixed on where Sullivan had stood. "Then why did you push him like that?" William turned his wheelchair toward his van, his expression resolute. "Because men like him only understand one thing: resistance. And I don't plan on giving him an inch." As they drove away, both knew the fight was far from over. Sullivan's threats weren't empty, they were promises, and whatever move he made next would be worse than anything they'd faced so far. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation, as Richard Sullivan tried to regain control of a case that had spiraled out of his hands. But just as Judge Harrington leaned forward to address the latest developments, chaos erupted. A reporter's phone buzzed loudly, and within seconds, gasps rippled through the room. The breaking news alert on the screen showed live footage: bulldozers tearing down William Thompson's home. William's heart sank as he saw the destruction unfold in real time. His wife's rose bushes, crushed under steel treads. The porch where he'd spent countless evenings, reduced to rubble. And now, the last standing wall of his house loomed precariously close to collapse. Without hesitation, William launched himself into action. He spun his wheelchair around, ignoring the stunned murmurs of the courtroom, and wheeled himself toward the exit as fast as he could. Sarah scrambled after him, her voice barely audible over the commotion. "William, slow down! What are you doing?" "There's no time," he shot back, his voice sharp with urgency. Every second mattered. His home, the life he had fought so hard to protect, was being destroyed right before his eyes, and he wasn't about to let it happen without a fight. By the time they reached the courthouse parking lot, William's van screeched onto the street, weaving through traffic at speeds that would have terrified anyone else. Sarah gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white. "This is illegal, William. They can't demolish your house while the case is still open." "They don't care," William growled, his jaw clenched. "Sullivan knew he couldn't win in court, so he's pulling this stunt to get rid of me before the law catches up to him." Sarah gritted her teeth, but didn't argue further. She pushed the pedal harder, closing the distance to William's neighborhood. As they approached, the devastation came into view. A massive construction truck blocking the road, workers in neon vests swarming the site, and the ominous shadow of a bulldozer looming over what remained of William's home. And there, standing off to the side, looking smug in his designer suit, was Richard Sullivan. The moment William saw him, something inside snapped. He flung open the van door and wheeled himself out, rage propelling him forward. "Stop!" His voice thundered over the sound of machinery, silencing the crew instantly. Heads turned, and the operator of the bulldozer lifted his hand, signaling for the machine to pause. Sullivan turned slowly, a satisfied smirk plastered across his face. "Ah, Mr. Thompson," he said casually, hands in his pockets. "You're just in time to watch history being made." William rolled right up to him, stopping mere inches away. "You have no legal right to do this," he snarled, his voice low and deadly. "Oh, but I do," Sullivan replied, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket. "This is an emergency demolition order, citing immediate hazard concerns. I pulled a few strings. Turns out your home is dangerously unstable and needs to be removed for public safety." William's hands tightened on his wheels. "You're lying." Sullivan shrugged nonchalantly. "Maybe, maybe not. But by the time anyone challenges it in court—" He gestured at the wreckage. "Well, too late." Sarah stormed forward. "You can't do this. The case hasn't even been settled." Sullivan smirked again. "Oh, I think it has." He turned to the bulldozer operator and waved his hand. "Finish the job." The engine roared to life, and the massive blade began inching closer to the last standing wall. But William's body moved before his brain could catch up. With pure instinct driving him, he launched himself forward, positioning his wheelchair directly in the path of the bulldozer. The crowd gasped. The bulldozer screeched to a halt, its blade just feet from William's chair. "What's he doing? Get him out of there!" Sullivan shouted, his composure cracking. But the workers hesitated. Because something had changed. People were watching, not just reporters, but neighbors, pastors, and townsfolk who had seen William around for years. Right now, he wasn't just fighting for his home, he was fighting for something bigger. A movement was starting, a stand against corruption, and Sullivan knew it. William's voice rang out strong and defiant. "This is my home, and I will not let you take it from me." Sullivan's fist clenched. He looked at the bulldozer driver. "Go." The driver hesitated, then turned off the engine. "I signed up to build houses, not destroy them for some rich lawyer," he muttered, wiping his hands on his vest. The crowd erupted in cheers. Neighbors started stepping forward, moving toward William in solidarity. That's when the first police car arrived. Then another, and another. Out of the lead vehicle stepped Judge Harrington himself, his expression furious. "Sullivan!" the judge bellowed. "I just got off the phone with the county commissioner. This demolition is illegal." Sullivan paled. That's not—" "I reviewed Thompson's case," Harrington continued, cutting him off. "The zoning laws don't apply to him, and you, Mr. Sullivan, are under investigation for fraudulently filing an emergency order for demolition." Before Sullivan could protest, officers moved in, yanking his hands behind his back and slapping handcuffs onto his wrists. Cheers erupted once more as Sullivan was dragged away, his smug confidence shattered. William closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him. He had won. He had finally won. As Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair, smiling through tears, she whispered, "You did it, William." He exhaled deeply, shaking his head. "No," he corrected her, looking around at the people standing behind him. "We did it." For the first time in a long time, he felt truly home. The fall of bright future developments was swift and devastating. Federal indictments rained down like thunder, targeting not just the company, but every corrupt official tied to their schemes. The CEO, Leonard Grant, sat behind bars alongside his top executives, their empire reduced to rubble, both literally and figuratively. Thousands of victims who had been wrongfully evicted, bullied, or stripped of their homes, were finally receiving justice. Checks arrived in mailboxes across the state, compensation for lives upended by greed. For many, it wasn't just money, it was closure. But for William Thompson, the real victory wasn't written on a check or printed in headlines. It was happening right here, on his land. What had once been a pile of debris and broken memories was now alive with activity. Neighbors, volunteers, veterans, even strangers from towns over showed up to help rebuild, not just his house, but his hope. Hammers rang out against nails, saws buzzed through wood, and laughter echoed under the bright sun as people worked, side by side. Sarah stood at the center of it all, directing groups with surprising authority. "Okay, team, let's get those beams up before lunch," she called out, her voice carrying over the hum of construction. She turned and spotted William rolling toward her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You really got this many people to show up," he said, glancing around at the bustling scene. Sarah smirked. "Are you kidding? People love a good underdog story. You're basically a hometown hero now." William chuckled softly. "Well, as long as they don't ask for autographs, I think I'll be all right." He wheeled closer, taking it all in, the cleared foundation, the framing of walls, rising steadily into the sky. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was something stronger, something built not just with wood and nails, but with unity and resilience. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the nearly finished structure, a young couple approached him shyly. "Mr. Thompson?" the woman began, clutching her husband's hand. "We just wanted to say thank you. We were one of the families kicked out because of bright future developments. Because of your lawsuit, we're finally getting our home back." William smiled warmly. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing." The man nodded eagerly. "Anything." William's expression grew serious. "If you ever see someone else getting pushed around the way we were, stand up for them. No one should have to fight alone." The couple nodded, tears welling in their eyes, and walked away with renewed determination. Watching them leave, William realized something profound. This wasn't just about his home anymore. It was about a movement, a spark ignited by his refusal to give up. 3 months later, the house was complete. A massive banner hung across the front porch. "Welcome home, William." The entire neighborhood gathered to celebrate. Children ran through the yard, chasing each other under twinkling string lights. Veterans swapped stories on the porch while neighbors laughed and shared food. Even reporters who had covered his case showed up, not to ask questions, but simply to witness the end of a story that had inspired an entire country. Sarah stood beside William, shaking her head in disbelief. "I still can't believe we pulled this off." William chuckled. "Did you ever doubt me?" She smirked. "Not even for a second." Michael Patterson, his lawyer, stepped forward holding a document. "Mr. Thompson, I think it's time for the final step." He handed William the deed, freshly signed and sealed. "This house is yours, William, forever. No loopholes, no legal tricks. No one will ever take it from you again." William took the paper, running his fingers over it. For so long, he had fought for this moment, for himself, for his community, for every person told they weren't powerful enough to stand up to the system. Tears burned at the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Instead, he turned to the crowd and smiled. "Well," he said, his voice steady, "who's ready for a housewarming party?" The crowd erupted into cheers, laughter filling the air as the celebration began. As the night wore on, the guests slowly trickled away, leaving William alone on the porch. He sat in his wheelchair, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in hues of orange and pink. Sarah joined him, plopping down with a fresh cup of coffee. "Well, hero, how's it feel?" she teased. William chuckled, shaking his head. "I think I'm too old to be called a hero." "Oh, come on," Sarah said. "A disabled veteran takes down one of the biggest corporate scams in the country and gets his house rebuilt by the very people who once thought he'd lose. Sounds like something out of a movie." William exhaled, staring at the stars fading into dawn. "It was never about me, Sarah." She nudged him gently. "Maybe not, but you gave people hope." William smiled softly. "Hope? Yeah, that's something worth fighting for." As the morning sun rose higher, William wheeled himself onto his porch, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up around him. It wasn't just a house, it was home. Sarah walked up, holding a newspaper. "Guess who made the front page again?" she said, grinning. William groaned. "Oh, for the love of—" Sarah laughed, waving the paper. "Relax, it's a good one this time." The headline read, "The Man Who Stood His Ground, How a Disabled Veteran Took on Corporate America and Won." Beneath it was a picture of William sitting proudly in front of his brand new house, a determined smile on his face. Sarah grinned. "So, what's next for William Thompson?" William took a long sip of coffee, then looked out at the horizon. "I think I'll just enjoy being home." With that, he turned his wheelchair, rolled inside, and closed the door behind him. The fight was over. Justice had been served. And for William Thompson, it was finally, truly, the end. Dedicated to all those who fight for justice, no matter the odds. If this story of courage, resilience, and justice inspired you, don't let the impact end here. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the power of determination and hope. Like this video to show your support for everyday heroes like William Thompson, who refuse to back down, and share it with others to spread the message that no matter how powerful the opponent, truth and perseverance can change the world. Together, let's keep these stories alive and inspire others to stand up for what's right. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice starts with you.